is an episode of I Can Do This Anatomy Review. The Alimentary Canal. We put food in our mouth, we chew it up with our teeth, our tongue, we have salivary glands. This mixes the food. This food becomes what's called the bolus. So we have on each jaw a set of teeth, a pair on each side. We have 2 pairs of incisors, 1 pair of canines, 2 pair of premolar, and 3 pair of molars. This is on each jaw, upper and lower jaw. 2, 1, 2, 3 is a way you can help you remember that. The tongue helps mix the food as we chew it. The salivary glands, we have a parotid salivary gland, submandibular salivary gland, and sublingual salivary gland, one on each side. And it helps mix saliva, digestive enzymes, and start to prepare that food into a bolus. The tongue propels that bolus up to the hard palate, back into the soft palate, the back of your throat, the pharynx. You're going to see the little punching bag thing, little hanging down. That is called the uvula. Well, its purpose is when the bolus of food enters the pharynx, that's the back of your throat where both air and food can be, the tongue presses that bolus up to the hard palate and back to that soft palate where the uvula seals off our nasal pharynx. Keeps that food from going up into your nasal cavity. Now, the food is then propelled down inferior and it hits the top of this epiglottis that is actually going to help close, so that food comes and it hits that epiglottis, the tongue presses it, it seals open the opening called the glottis, and it seals it shut so we don't aspirate our food. So then that the tongue propels food down into the esophagus. The upper esophageal sphincter has to open to allow the bolus in, then it will close. This is kind of a peristaltic movement. So it moves it down, it opens and then closes it down. This muscular tube, the esophagus, propels that food from the pharynx down to the stomach. Now the lower esophageal sphincter has to open. When it opens, it empties into the stomach at the cardiac region, and then it will close. The cardiac region, on to the left, there's an upper pouch known as the fundus, and the body is a large cavity of the stomach. And then the food is mixed and churned with digestive enzymes, acids. The mucus helps protect our lining. The stomach is churning because of the 3 layers of muscularis externa here. And then it's going to be pushed into the narrowing of the stomach towards the right side. This is known as our pylorus, also known as the gatekeeper. Now the gatekeeper, that's what pylorus means. It has a very large sphincter muscle at the distal end of the stomach that regulates the entrance and exit of material. This opens to allow the basically it's called chyme at this time from the stomach. The food becomes chyme. The beginning of time is the beginning of time of digestion and absorption from your food. That chyme enters the duodenum. The duodenum, or duodenum as it's also referred to as, is the first of 3 segments of the small intestine. The duodenum actually is a it goes to the right from the stomach and it travels behind the peritoneal cavity. So we call it retroperitoneal structure. And that also wraps around the head of the pancreas. The pancreas has three major segments: the head, the body, and the tail. At the tail, as it goes across the posterior abdominal wall, or cavity I should say, the tail of the pancreas is at the spleen. Now the spleen is not part of the digestive organs, but it does play a role with the circulatory system, lymphatic system, and it basically takes out the dead blood cells, brings that back to the liver. So the pancreas, and what we're talking about here, is known as the exocrine pancreas because it has a lot of pancreatic ducts. The pancreatic ducts are what deliver the digestive enzymes and buffers to the duodenum. It empties along with the common bile duct, and the bile that's inside is actually produced in the liver. It's transported via the left and right hepatic ducts, and it forms the common hepatic duct. The gallbladder stores and concentrates the bile, and it's joined up and emptied via the cystic duct. So the cystic duct and the common hepatic duct join and form this common bile duct that empties into the duodenum along with the pancreatic duct. Now, the duodenum will then reemerge into the peritoneal cavity with a little bend up and in to the peritoneum. This is known as the jejunum. J-E-J-U-num. Jejunum. Jejunum. J-E-J-U-num. That's just a way I help remember it. This is where a lot of absorption takes place. Now, this, excuse me one sec. The jejunum will then end when the ileum begins. The ileum is the distal end of the small intestine. Now I'm talking about ileum, part of your small intestine, not the ileum, part of your os coxa or hip bone. Now the ileum in the small intestine is spelled I-L-E-U-M. And think of it like this: I-L-E, E for eating tube, as opposed to ileum, I-L-I-U-M, for your hip bones. So this way, it'll help you remember this. Also, D-J-I, duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. Ileum ends at the ileocecal valve. The ileocecal valve prevents this end of chyme, is the end of time where we can have any kind of absorption from our food for nutrients, and it's emptied into the large intestine. The ileocecal valve prevents the backflow of the contents back into the small intestine. The collecting pouch in the right lower quadrant is called the cecum. This is the first part of the large intestine. Off of the cecum, we also have vermiform appendix. The vermiform appendix is a small structure that you might have heard someone have had appendicitis, or appendicitis. Now, appendectomy, when they had to remove it. Anyway, this is continue our journey, the alimentary canal. The cecum, you seek them, you find them. This is the beginning of feces. So, going superior, we have what's called the ascending colon, and then towards and by the liver region, it's going to bend and go towards the left of the body. That bend is known as the right colic flexure, also known as the hepatic flexure, meaning the bend at the liver. It's going to go across. This means transverse. So we have what's called the transverse colon. Then there's a bend, another bend going down, and this is on the left side. That bend is at the over by the spleen. So we call it the splenic flexure or left colic flexure. Now we're going down. This going down is called the descending colon. The descending colon will then have towards the left lower quadrant, there's another bend, and this is called the sigmoid flexure. Now it bends into the curvy part known as sigmoid colon, and then it will straighten out and go straight inferior, what is called, and straighten out. This is known as the rectum. The opening of the rectum is known as the anus. Now there's two sphincters. There's an upper, which is the involuntary sphincter called the internal anal sphincter, and the one that is a little bit of overlap, but the one that is more distal or inferior, this is the external anal sphincter. This is what, and that's voluntary. That helps regulate the defecation. So anyway, that's a kind of a journey down the alimentary canal. Now, the supportive structures that actually support some of these organs of the digestive system are known as the mesenteries, excuse me. So we have the mesenteries at the stomach. The lesser curvature of the stomach, lesser omentum, means lesser apron. The one at the greater curvature of the stomach that overlies a lot of these abdominal organs with fat impregnated in the membrane, this is called the greater omentum. Now, what supports the jejunum and ileum, and this is where you have your superior mesenteric artery going right into this region. This is called the mesentery proper. Now the mesentery proper supports jejunum and ileum. The colon is from the cecum to the rectum. That's the large intestine, excuse me. Large intestine is between cecum and the rectum. The colon is between the cecum and rectum. Now, the colon is supported by what's known as the mesocolon, and it is named after the segment it's supporting. Ascending mesocolon, transverse mesocolon, and then descending mesocolon, and we also have the sigmoid mesocolon. Those are the supportive structures. So accessory structures: liver, pancreas, gallbladder, and that's just kind of a quick overview of the alimentary canal. Signing off, this episode is brought to you by SheerImpact.com.